Good morning and welcome to Morning Movie News. Every day I ask you what you'd like to see covered on this show, and on Friday a number of you said, Grace, you have to cover this latest news that Black Widow is getting her own movie. And I was like, what? How'd I miss that headline? So I quickly went to all of my usual sources and saw nothing. What was going on here? So I decided to just Google Black Widow movie, and sure enough, in the news section of search, where they really pull headlines from any news source, really anything qualifies, there were a couple of headlines saying Marvel Studios announces a Black Widow movie is in development. And right there I could see why it wasn't being picked up across the board by all the entertainment news sites. And I want to explain to you what's going on there, which is not only a catch-22 for Marvel Studios, but also for Hollywood in general, how development is a very tricky term. All right, so let's start off with what's going on specifically at Marvel. So what happened here is that Total Film has, their latest issue has come out, and in it they're covering Captain America: The Winter Soldier. And in that coverage, they had an interview with Kevin Feige, who is the face of Marvel Studios because he's the head of Marvel Studios. And I think he's really doing a fantastic job. He's really supposed to be the big picture guy. Well, he's also a small picture guy. Kevin Feige is intimately involved in every film that they're making over there at Marvel Studios, but also keeps an eye on the long-term plan, their long-term game, and making sure they don't make a mistake. And I think a number of us agree that that's a big problem that DC has, is they don't have a counterpart over at Warner Brothers to fill Kevin Feige's position. Kevin Feige has been at Marvel Studios since the beginning, and when Disney purchased Marvel, they kept him on board, and they largely just leave him alone, which is good, because Kevin Feige makes decisions that are not only good business decisions, but protect the property that he has been tasked to safeguard. Whereas you have suits over at Warner Brothers who don't have a relationship with these characters, they don't feel any particular affinity or responsibility for them, and they're making decisions based on their bottom line, both for the company and with the responsibility to, people who are investors with Warner Brothers, etc. So I think that's one area where Marvel and DC movies differ drastically, which is having an effect on the outcome. So anyway, Kevin Feige, he does an interview. He's often very public. He's not a behind the scenes guy. He is, as I said, the face of Marvel Studios. Actively, he wants that role. In addition, I think he and Joss Whedon really are the co-architects of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is good, because I think when you just hand it over to talent, they can leave eventually, which I think is what happened with Warner Brothers again and Christopher Nolan. A very good relationship there, but then again, eventually Nolan wanted to do other things, which nobody can blame him. But then there was nobody left at Warner Brothers to continue on. They had to just start from scratch, whereas Feige, I think, will always be there unless he retires. He's done such a fantastic job. Probably will never retire. He can, because this is something he likes. He's actually is a former, I'm sure he still reads comics, but he started out as a fan before he became, somebody who was in the business of, depicting these characters for other fans. So anyway, they have an interview with him, and they say, well, Black Widow has a really big increased role in the sequel, Captain America: The Winter Soldier. Do you think you might ever give her own movie? And Kevin Feige says, well, let me tell you, we have one in development. And everyone just jumps on this statement because everybody wants to see this. I think there's a lot of frustration, in addition to the anticipation of a female superhero being the star of a comic book film. A frustration and anticipation, I think, is shared with fellow fans who want to see just any minority character as the lead of one of these films, instead of these female characters and minority characters continually being introduced as supporting characters in movies that star white male characters. I don't think it's anything personal. I think it's just these studios, even Marvel Studios, unwilling to take a risk, which is unfortunate. Look at Fast and Furious, very successful. I don't understand why this continues to be something. Marvel puts out so many movies a year, they should be able to roll the dice on one of them. Because, they put out like 2 or 3 movies a year. If one isn't a huge hit, and I think a female superhero film or a Black Panther film, for instance, if done correctly, which Marvel has so far done, they've done their films correctly, I think would be successful. But anyway, it's just too big a roll of the dice for them right now. They aren't doing it. But Feige's saying, but we are developing it. We are developing this Black Widow film. And everyone gets very excited. But let's keep in mind that he's been saying he's developing a lot of films. Basically, if you ask Kevin Feige about any Marvel character, he turns to you and says, that's in development. Because development is a very loose term. Now, is Kevin Feige trying to trick us? No, I think he has very good intentions. And I think, honestly, for him, any character in the Marvel Cinematic Universe that he still has the rights to really is genuinely on the board is an option. Never say never. I think if he's willing to make a movie about Guardians of the Galaxy, he's willing to make a movie about anything, as long as he feels he can make it a success. Again, as people have said, I've repeated this quote before. One of you had commented, I can't believe that a talking raccoon is a more viable film character than Black Panther or a female lead. But we're getting Scarlet Witch, we're getting Wasp, we're getting more female superhero characters in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Gamora. So maybe one of those will eventually break out into their own film. I think Black Widow maybe is the leading choice. Scarlett Johansson is very popular in the role. Scarlett Johansson is pretty popular as an actress herself, although she's not a big box office draw. Even still, with the Avengers movie under her belt or on her resume, she's still not someone I think you could be like, oh, put Scarlett Johansson in your movie, it's going to do well. I don't think they're there yet. But she does have an increased role here. Maybe people will like her more. Maybe she'll get more of an even bigger fan base. And maybe, the demand from fans will increase for her to get her own film. We'll have to see what happens when we see the movie. But another reason I think Black Widow is not a great choice maybe for her own movie, despite all the work that's been done to develop her character, is that she doesn't have a particularly impressive set of superpowers. I mean, she is supposed to be juiced up like Captain America, to have super reflexes and somewhat super strength, although it's never really shown in the movies. Although, how could she survive and do some of the things she does if she didn't have those aspects? So I wonder if they'll address that maybe in Captain America, the Winter Soldier. I mean, she did go through the Black Widow program, which is to some degree a little bit like, the Captain America Super Soldier program. And maybe, the things that are done to create the Winter Soldier, maybe we're done to create the Black Widow. We'll see how this all ties together. I'm trying not to give spoilers. And so maybe they can up her strength a little bit, because if they can make a Captain America movie with his power set, why not a Black Widow movie? We'll see. We'll have to see. But still, she doesn't have as amazing powers as, say, for instance, maybe the Scarlet Witch would have, or, the Wasp, or if they ever introduce Carol Danvers, who's started out as Ms. Marvel and is now Captain Marvel in the comics. Although, iconic character maybe to the Avengers lineup, but Marvel, the comic, is trying so hard to push Carol right now, but I just don't see, she's never been that popular a character. She's not as popular as, unfortunately, the characters they've sold off, like Rogue, Storm, Kitty Pryde even. The X-Men characters, female characters, are much more popular than any of the female Avengers ever have been, and still are. I think the comic is yet, even She-Hulk, they just launched a new She-Hulk comic again. Captain Marvel does have her own title, but still, no, they're putting Captain Marvel also on Guardians of the Galaxy, maybe to try and up her profile. But none of it's really worked to date, so we'll see. But that's another reason you're not getting a Black Widow movie. So development. What does development mean? It's a very tricky term. If you are ever lucky enough to get a property that you have into a studio system and someone says, congratulations, your book or comic or whatever, your pitch is in development. Don't break out the champagne just yet. Projects can be in development for decades. They can never get out of development. It is only when your film is greenlit and in pre-production, and even a screenwriter isn't enough of something for anyone to get excited about. You need to have a director attached. Even stars can be attached, and this film can just languish and never go anywhere. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One, they always want to have a really, a deep slate of films in development to pull from when they want to greenlight something. They want to have things at the ready. You want to have a deep bench, to borrow a sports term, to pull from. So that's one reason that you have a lot of projects that are in development, even though a number of them are never going to become movies. The other reason is you have development executives whose whole job is to find properties for studios to make into movies. Now, they want to look like it's worth having them on salary. So they have to aggressively pursue projects to put into development just to prove their worth in their position and their job. So it's a little bit mercenary to that degree when you look at it from that perspective. So just always keep in mind, development really means nothing. I mean, I guess it means that it's occurred to the people it needs to occur to make said movie, but it is so far from actually happening that, don't let, Kevin Feige, I think, is trying to appease fans by saying these projects are in development, not in a malicious way, but I think just in a way to try and, appease fans, as I just said, but don't fall for it. And I hope that in the future when people ask him if he's making so-and-so movie and he says it's in development, I think a better question is, what are your phase 3 films? Have you greenlit any phase 3 films yet? That's the big question. And it doesn't seem that they have. So we'll see. But maybe a Black Widow movie will be one of them, but I wouldn't be surprised if we saw maybe a Scarlet Witch movie first, or even a Captain Marvel. Or more likely, I think you're more likely to see a Black Panther film actually first before one of those characters, which I think would be great. I just want any diversity at all in these films, and I wonder how long that they can get away with it before they have a problem. Although I have to say, flipping over to DC, I think we're more likely to get a Wonder Woman movie before any of this, if it works out. Because Wonder Woman, very well-known character, she has her own set of problems in being co-opted by feminists. I think that's very difficult for her. I think she's never had much of a way of a personality that's been developed. It's just, she has a lot of the same problems that Superman does. So we'll see. We'll see. But I think you would see a Wonder Woman movie before any female characters from Marvel. All right, so that's the first story of the day. The second story of the day is that speaking of Warner Brothers and Disney going head-to-head in the superhero division, it looks like they're going to take their fight to fairy tales as well. Now, Warner Brothers, despite having, The Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, really a lot of great franchises of their own, they're really trying to copy the Disney playbook, of course with their DC formula, but now they're really aggressively pursuing live-action fairy tales, which Disney is doing with Maleficent. They have Cinderella coming up. They had Alice in Wonderland, of course. We have an Alice in Wonderland 2. Disney has a very deep slate. Talk about that, that deep term again. They have a very deep slate of films that are greenlit of live-action fairy tales. And now so does Warner Brothers. Now, of course, we've already talked about their Peter Pan film. They're making Peter Pan. It took the old Batman vs. Superman release date in 2015. It's going up against Ant-Man now. I think that is not so great for Peter Pan, but it's going to be directed by Joe Wright, who did Anna Karenina. I think Anna Karenina was very visually interesting. I think Joe Wright is an interesting visual director. I think story-wise, though, he falls apart a little bit. I think Anna Karenina was an experiment. He tried to create a film that was taking place on a stage, almost like a Russian dolls, a film within a film within a film, and it didn't work. But I guess I applaud him for taking the risk, even though it failed so horribly. But, I liked what he did in Atonement with the typewriter. But that was very clever to have a typewriter there that was also not only visually interesting, but they used those typewriter sounds almost as the score. Well, actually not almost. It was the score of the film in some ways, which I thought really helped that film and was a great choice. So Joe Wright's directing this. Hugh Jackman will star as some pirate called Blackbeard that Hook and Pan will team up to go against. And so it's really kind of like how that goes sour and Hook and Pan become enemies eventually at the end of the film. Hook will be played by Garrett Hedlund from Tron Legacy. I expressed my serious doubts about that casting when it was announced, and they're saying there's an open casting call for the role of this younger Pan. Now this is another thing, like development, it's a Hollywood trick sometimes. Don't get pulled in by it. They often just say they're doing an open casting call like they did for Star Wars. We'll see. By the way, they said the casting for Star Wars is complete, but it just hasn't been announced. That's really impressive. They're keeping that a secret, but there was an open casting call for actors for Star Wars Episode 7. But that's often just done to create hype and buzz around a film. For instance, Gone with the Wind had an open casting call for Scarlett O'Hara. Ended up being established actress Vivian Leigh anyway. So don't fall for this open casting call PR stunt. It very rarely actually results in someone getting a role. But anyway, that's their first fairy tale. Now, it was also announced they're working very aggressively on the Jungle Book. And this is where they're going to go up against Disney directly, because Disney is developing their own live-action Jungle Book with Jon Favreau at the helm. Now, Disney's worked very hard to keep Jon Favreau at the studio, despite throwing him off of the Iron Man franchise. That was a very horrible, sad situation where Favreau really campaigned to get Downey Jr. the role in the first place in the first film, but then when Iron Man 2, I liked Iron Man 2, but a lot of people didn't, so that made Robert Downey Jr. and Marvel nervous. Robert Downey Jr. decided, agreed that they should replace Jon Favreau, despite Jon Favreau sticking up for him with the first film. Anyway, of course, as we all know, Favreau got kicked off. Shane Black took over for Iron Man 3. People still had problems, so I guess that's revenge for, or ironic revenge for Jon Favreau. But anyway, first they promised him Kingdom Keepers over at Disney to helm. That never materialized. Another film in development, or even at the, I guess that's that's a situation where a director was attached, still didn't move forward. But now Jon Favreau, they want him to helm a Jungle Book. Now I think Jon Favreau, though, as much as I'm saying about how people should be loyal to him, I think visually he is not an interesting director. I think he excels, or not even excels, but he's a solid comedy director, but I've never seen him to make any interesting visual choices as a director. So I think that Warner Brothers is lucky there, if that's who Disney is picking, because it sets the bar pretty low for their competing Jungle Book. So who does Warner Brothers want? Well, they're currently talking to Ron Howard. I think that's a great choice. I think it's very exciting. I think it's something, well, Ron Howard directed The Grinch Stole Christmas, which a lot of people didn't like. That was a fantasy film. I liked The Grinch Stole Christmas. I thought it was very good. But, Ron Howard, I think after the Da Vinci Code and The Grinch Stole Christmas, and really disappointing a lot of fans with his adaptations of very beloved material, he really has had to prove himself again. And he was like a director who had to prove himself in Rush. That's his latest film. Now, talk about a director becoming very visually aggressive. I thought the visual choices he made in Rush were impressive and wonderful, and he did prove that he still has it. I think he's now actually, of course, he directed A Beautiful Mind, a big Oscar winner. He's had a very good career, a very strong career, but I feel creatively he is at the top of his game now. So I hope he takes that same creativeness that he brought to the visuals of Rush and applies it to The Jungle Book, instead of maybe going back to his, more mainstream directing style that he did originally. I just think that it would be great to see him continue to take risks, because he did such a great job with Rush. As I said in my review, it was a lean, mean cinematic machine, and he directed like a new indie director out of the gate, and I was really impressed with it. Now for Jungle Book, I would hope that they really play up the Indian qualities of the film. I expressed my disappointment in $1 Million Arm, that John Hamm film about finding cricket players in India to pitch for Major League Baseball, how that's told from the perspective of the American rather than the perspective of the Indian players, which I think would be much more interesting. So I hope that this Jungle Book really plays up the Indian qualities of the story, and maybe has a Life of Pi vibe. That was a really visually interesting film. Ang Lee did a great job with the 3D, and I thought Suraj Sharma was fantastic in the lead role. And I probably would try and go with a little older Mowgli. I mean, of course, he's found when he's a kid by these animals, but maybe we could fast forward to him being like a late teen, early 20-something character, as they did for that other, I forget, he played Bruce Lee. And they did a live action Jungle Book like maybe about a couple years, like maybe about a decade ago. And I think his name was Jason, and he was an actor. He played Bruce Lee in the Bruce Lee story, and he then went on to do this Jungle Book role, which kind of worked, kind of didn't. It was very, very 90s, as I recall. It was a long time ago, but I would like to see something a little bit more interesting, and maybe it's Tarzan-esque, maybe almost making the Jungle Book the Indian Tarzan. That would be a great selling point. All right, so that's the second story of the day. And I'd be curious to know who you guys think is going to win this live-action fairy tale race. Will this switch where Warner Brothers beats Disney? Although Maleficent looks so interesting, even if it's a mommy dearest level, a kind of like, it's a disaster, but I can't look away. I mean, we'll see how it turns out. It has some amazing aspects to it and some not so amazing aspects. Really interesting to see who's named the winner here. All right, so that's the second story. The third story is that we've also been talking a lot about the decreased quality of the movie-going experience, at least here in the United States, because movie theaters are becoming really lax in how they enforce the rules and even the cleanliness of the environment they provide. And that's why smaller chains like Alamo Drafthouse are really making a name for themselves, and also the ArcLight out in the West Coast, because they really do a good job of creating a nice environment that's maintained and safeguarded. So anyway, Regal had to renounce its, because it has shareholders, they had to announce their fourth quarter earnings. And a lot of people were really, scared by the fact that even though there was only a slight dip in the actual earnings, thanks to increased ticket prices and, add-ons like 3D, Gravity was a big 3D, while overall audiences are not buying 3D tickets, they did for Gravity, so that was a big earner. However, attendance fell 7.8% in the fourth quarter, which is amazing considering the films that were out there. Desolation of Smaug, Hunger Games Catching Fire, Frozen. How is attendance down? Those are some mega juggernaut hits. But apparently it is anyway. And, the analysts for this are trying to write it off because they're like, oh, by the way, the first quarter of 2014 is already ahead of expectations. That was just a blip. Who knows why people didn't go? And they're saying, well, but maybe one theory is that's when the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One came out. So for that quarter, everybody was just home playing video games, and now they're back. That's unfortunate. I really hope this would be a wake-up call, and maybe we'll get another wake-up call going down the line, that these theaters just aren't providing a good movie-going experience. I think it's really unfortunate, and I think that it's unfortunate that they aren't doing their job in the first place, and I think it's unfortunate when they have a clue like this, they try and find a way to write it off so it's not their fault. But I'm curious how you guys feel. We've discussed this a few times, but I just wanted to revisit it with this latest update. Are you going to the movies less? Are you trying to go to these new chains? Is there another new chain besides Alamo Drafthouse and ArcLight, which is also doing a good job that I haven't mentioned? And also, I've heard from so many people in other countries, outside of the United States, other BTT viewers, about how you have such wonderful movie-going experiences. So I'm curious, what's the name of the chains that you're going to? How do they enforce that? Do they have to make an effort, or you just have more polite moviegoers in your country and they don't have to enforce it? So that's the third story of the day. Now the viewer question, I think this was a really good viewer question. This is from the Batman Nerd. And I thought this was a question that not only a lot of you would find the answer interesting to, but I feel it's a situation where a lot of people make a common mistake. So I wanted to try and keep people from doing that. So the Batman Nerd says, question: what movies would you recommend to watch for people interested in directing and writing films? I've been watching a lot of independent films, but there are any must-watch movies for independent filmmakers? Great question, the Batman nerd. I think it's really crucial to get a good reference point for yourself as an artist. Some people tend to think, oh, I can just create from my own imagination, but you really need to be aware of what's out there, what's doing well, what's not doing well, and what's succeeded, etc. So I think that's important. But here's what I think you should do. More than just watching independent films, I think anyone who's interested in breaking into Hollywood in any way needs to go and find someone they admire who's already doing that job, and not just watch their favorite films of that person, which I think that's the common mistake that's made. People try and emulate their favorite films. That's not the way to go. Find that person's first film. Find the film that got them on their road to success where they are now. Find the film that was their breakthrough role, and a breakthrough film, either beyond front of the camera or behind. And don't just watch the movie. Research that movie. How did that movie become a breakthrough role? Because you know what? Making a good movie isn't the only thing you have to do to be successful in Hollywood. Sometimes you don't even have to make a good movie. It's such a political and business environment, obviously, that the creative aspect is just one facet of it. So you need to find out, did this person have a mentor? Was someone looking out for them? Do they have an agent? Who was that agent? How did they get the agent in the first place? You can get this information from interviews, just basically, maybe you should find a film right now that's really hot. Every year at Sundance, there's a big hot film. For instance, this year, as I mentioned on earlier morning movie news, it's Whiplash, the film starring Miles Teller and J.K. Simmons. Go find out how that movie's gotten on the board. Go find out that story. There should be a lot of interviews about that. Also, you can just go on IMDb and track that person, the different films they've made and what happened to it. And you can go to the company credits and see who produced it, what studio is backing it up. Was it purchased before it went into the festival, or did it get a distributor out of the festival? You just really need to pay attention to the moves that people are making, but at the same time realize there's no one path into Hollywood. Everyone has a different story to tell pretty much. It's like snowflakes. So you want to just maybe follow a couple different people and then see what works for you. There's no tried and true way into Hollywood. There's no route. It's always been difficult to do, but yet the media likes to make it seem like it's easy. So that's another Hollywood trick. It's not easy to break into Hollywood. No one has broken into Hollywood and had it easy. That's just a spin that they like to put in these stories when they cover it. They love to have, oh, it's an instant breakthrough. Oh, Lana Turner was just sitting on a stool drinking a milkshake and a casting director discovered her. Still, maybe that was her. Maybe that was the starting point, but a lot of deals had to be made behind the camera, etc. I'm sure she had to do a lot of stuff. It's never that simple. Don't fall for the Hollywood, the media story they're trying to sell you. It's not true, and they could get away with that a long time ago when we weren't as savvy, but we are savvy now, so we want to know what actually happened. So that's my advice. I hope that's helpful to Batman Nerd. Great question. And of course, starting on Wednesday, because I'll be traveling, I'm going away for a vacation, personal vacation with my family. There will be all question episodes for Wednesday through the next Wednesday. So that's 6 episodes, 3 questions each. That's a lot of questions. All right, so I hope you enjoy them, and leave below anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow and any questions you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.